Newsroom. Like I said, we'll take a look at the biggest story, which of course was Donald Trump's and Uhuru's visit there. This is the third time they're meeting. Of course, the very first time they met around last year in Italy for the G7. But this is the first time both heads of state have been meeting exclusively. And on the table were Kenya-US relations. If you're just joining us, allow me to reintroduce the panel this morning. Sitting closer to me, I have Evans Wafula. He is a journalist. I have also John Gashie, the chairman of Article 19. And on my far left, Caleb Atemi, a veteran journalist. Gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to have you this morning. Before we can dive into the aspect of this big historical meeting, should I say, I just want to get a general feel, and it doesn't have to be politics really, it can be across any board. Is there a specific story or a specific journalist that you read or you watched this week, locally, internationally, and you said, wow, something that caught your attention? I'll begin with you, Wafula.
I think internationally. Okay. Just seeing how the case in the U.S., the Donald Trump Republican saga is unfolding, looking at the evidence that actually emerging from many of the inner circle of the Donald Trump election. I think it's really interesting to watch because every day we are seeing big people falling on the wayside of the American politics, and that then defines the American politics. I don't know whether it's asserts the fact that it's democratic, but it also asserts the fact that who Donald Trump himself is. It actually brings out his persona and his character as a president and also as an individual, the kind of things he maybe had done before he became president, and what the kind of dealings that he was cutting. I mean, somebody who is close to you to just come up and then take sort of a plea bargain, you have to be able to reveal. I think it's very interesting to see.
Not even his own lawyers are safe.
No, exactly.
Do you think he'll finish this term?
I think it's interesting to say. I mean, many people have been started talking about impeachment. Senior Republicans, senior Democrats talking about impeaching the U.S. president. We just wait and see. But I think it's quite a bit of mature politics.
You know what shocked me is the fact that he has not been invited to John McCain's funeral. That must have been something bitter for him. And you know, John McCain is someone who is very fundamental to U.S. politics and history.
That's what we call he asked for it. I think I remember during his campaign, he really kind of tried to paint John McCain as not a patriot. And knowing the fact that John McCain is one of the patriots, I mean, having fought in the World War. And actually, I think that was very unfortunate for Donald Trump to actually try to delink himself from the history of the American people. So I think he deserves it. I mean, he asked for it and it's come for him. So I think not being invited there also paints his character. I mean, as a president, I think this is one of the most high-profile funerals in the United States.
All right, Kashi, what about you? Any local, international story or a journalist you felt like this week this journalist did an amazing job telling a specific story?
Over the weekend, I came across a number of stories in the Kenyan newspapers right across, looking at why now, in the sense, why has Donald Trump all of a sudden decided to come to Africa, so to speak?
Yes.
And the stories I had, for me, were well done, in the sense that they were trying to juxtapose why is perhaps all of a sudden Trump feeling that Africa is important. And we are given a larger context in that with the trade war, with the changes in the international community, I think America, and indeed the Western world, they are thinking and reviewing their relationship vis-a-vis China. All right? And I also perhaps wanted to say this, that for an official visit and a state visit, from a foreign policy etiquette issue, it's not a one-day affair. So perhaps we would wanted to find out when was the invitation extended, because remember, this was an invitation by the President of the U.S. to President Uhuru Kenyatta. President just don't go on asking for a cup of tea.
True.
From a diplomatic etiquette and conduct of international relations, it's a process. What was it and what is in it for America? And I think that question was answered perhaps to some extent, that America is trying to reposition itself not to lose out.
And we're going to discuss that right now. We're going to take it further. But Gashia, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you, especially given that we are journalists, we're in the newsroom. Early this year, if I'm not wrong, if it was not late last year, we got to use a term that we don't often, never use in the newsroom after Donald Trump referred to the entire continent using one specific vulgar term, which I will not repeat. But do you think that this meeting, that U.S. Washington wanting to relook and restructure its relationship with the African continent, more so Kenya, is truly sincere? Because it is, I mean, Trump just called us the other day a very vulgar term, only now for him to call our president and say, hey, let's have tea.
Let me say this. In foreign relations, right, country comes first. Do you understand?
Right.
101 foreign relation. Now, let's then flip it. For Uhuru, what came first? Is it him or is it Kenya? And I think we are waiting to hear from Uhuru and his delegation, what is it that Kenya got out of this? And I think that is why perhaps everybody, the country is waiting to have what we call a scorecard. What is it that you went? What did we gain? Because international relations is not about friendship. It's about Kenya first or America first. And I think international relation 101 is what benefits, cost-benefit analysis for the benefit of the country.
Wow. All right. Atimi, for you, what's the big story, or which journalist stood out for you?
Two things. First, I'll pick up from Gashie.
Right.
I think Trump entered the White House with one big weakness, foreign policy. He misunderstood that America was powerful, or remained powerful, because of working with other nations.
Right.
So when he began going isolationist, and China emerging, and Russia getting back to its feet as a superpower, I think it's simply, he's realized almost late in the day that he's losing Africa and the rest of the world to the Chinese and the Russians because of some either ignorance or arrogance that really doesn't make sense. So we'll discuss details, but I think Uhuru went there with more cards in his hands than Trump.
So I'm guessing also this story was the biggest for you in the course of the week as well.
Yes, because you play with us or you go to China. Another story was football. Manu being hammered by Spurs. I'm not a football fan.
I think you're actually going to say Gor Mahia versus FC.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. And then locally, Gor Mahia and FC.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
Gashia is also passionate about it.
Yes. Yeah. I was.
But I'm talking about Gor Mahia and FC because those two have been and still remain the teams that hold football in Kenya together. And I wish that our fan base could actually refocus. Every Kenyan could actually behave and be like a Gor Mahia fan. And we build all our teams together and build our football and our sports generally. I'm a karate instructor. I like to see karate also grow to the level of football in the country.
I hope it does. Yeah. I really hope it does. All right, gentlemen, let's dive head on with this specific story.
But just before you go there, let me just put, there was a very interesting story that was developing.
Okay.
And perhaps we failed to follow up.
Which story was that?
Or rather, the Kenyan public was not as excited. That story was the Commission of Inquiry into the state capture in South Africa. And the whole essence of that was that the former South African president, Zuma, was accused of having had corruption on steroids. And indeed, right now, when he was shut out, there is a commission of inquiry that is going on. And who is appearing? A lot of the key players, senior intelligence, police people. And I think it is something that we needed to have kept our eyes on, because the tidbits that are coming out about corruption, state capture, and what have you, that is an interesting story that we did. Perhaps it's a question of what's our foreign coverage, foreign coverage within the media.
Right.
That's a fantastic story.
I like that, Gashi, because especially when Zuma was found out that he had built a swimming pool, if I remember, 23 million rands, he said it was the sake of his security, and he called it a fire pool. And everyone was like, really? But I like that point. I think it's because of what's been happening in Uganda, and Kenyans, we like to focus our attention on one thing.
Yes.
But it's going to be interesting to see how all that wraps out. And Zuma has quite a number of corruption cases. The Guptas themselves are also not being secured from that. One of the most powerful families. So we're going to keep an eye on that. But, Wafula, let me bring up that question that Gashi was talking about. Why now? Why now? Why are we seeing Washington being so concerned with the relationship with Nairobi, given the fact that Nairobi and Beijing seem to have a very close-knit relationship? It's getting tighter by the day, by the year, with every check that we get. Why do you think Washington right now is so worried, and now they're starting to woo Kenya?
I wouldn't say why now, because in the American history, the Republicans are perceived to be very soft towards Africa. And even during the George Bush tenure, Africa benefited a lot.
Right.
There was a slight shift during the Obama. Even the fact that he has a root in this country, I don't think Kenya benefited so much from Obama. I think it's an issue of policy change and policy shift. I think Donald Trump realizes that he has to do something not only to Kenya, but Africa in general. But most important also the question of the Chinese. I think the Chinese offer a very fundamental strategy for the Americans. Look at what the Chinese are doing. Issues like human rights, democracy, economy are not things that are being pegged on any strings attached. And now these many African dictators and many African governments are going towards China, not because of economic benefit, because look at countries that are leaning towards China.
Right.
They're the most despotic, most undemocratic, because they know China offers them a soft landing. Right. And I think it's important for us to see one thing, that Donald Trump offering an opportunity to do business with Kenya, but also being able to tighten that nose of ensuring that issues like human rights, democracy are respected. So I think the Republicans are traditionally people who are very firm when it comes to dealing with especially African countries, because they tend to want to entrench some kind of policies and some kind of issues that would probably affect the entire community. So I wouldn't say why now, but it's just, I think what Caleb Watemi said is that Donald Trump might have ignored that he's not only it's not about his emotions. You know, he's known to be a very emotional person.
Right.
Look what he did with the Korean president, the young boy. I mean,
Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, he decided that I'm going to break all the protocols and I'm going to meet him. So probably for him, meeting Uhuru might not be very important to him,
right,
but entrenching that traditional understanding that the Republicans have actually been leaning towards Africa and being soft towards Africa is what maybe has come to check.
Gentlemen, as always, this trip came with a lot of economic goodies. Soon enough, we'll see an energy construction of its own southern of Nairobi, costing a whooping $232 million US. That's about 23.8 billion Kenyan shillings. Not small numbers at all. Atemi, let me come to you. Do you think, as journalists, we do justice to this numbers in saying how will this 23.8 billion Kenyan shillings benefit you and I as Kenyans? How will it benefit Mama Mboga? Do we do justice when it comes to breaking down those high number of figures?
Sometimes we do. Nowadays we've got very good digital and data reporters who actually do a lot of great work with the figures. But now, for instance, Americans taking up the Mombasa, let's say Malaba superhighway. That's one of the key roads. Actually, it's a nerve center of Kenya's economy that should have been transformed many years ago. Before we even did Thika, we should have begun there. Because remember that when you talk about Uganda, Uganda carries 70% of our trade. It's our biggest trading partner. Even forget about the US and other people. And now the Northern Corridor feeds us into the Great Lakes region. And it's important to break down to the readers what that will do. Let's say the Kenya Ports Authority, what that will do to the trade from the coast and the world to our importation and export sector, and what that will do along the route people who live along the corridor and the cities that it cuts through. Economically, that's a huge transformation. But we need to bring it down to the woman and the man on the streets and the villages.
Right. All right, Gashia, as the former Foreign Affairs Desk at Nation, how would you grade our coverage of this specific visit between Donald Trump and Uhuru Kenyatta? We're also expecting Theresa May very soon. And the reason why I ask this is that do we give it enough importance? I remember when President Barack Obama visited, and not this time around, the very first time when he was still president, there was one joke that said that we were so excited about, and when I mean we as journalists, we were so excited, our cameras when the plane took off, it went till it disappeared somewhere in the air. That's how excited we were when it comes to covering this specific foreign visit. But this one, how would you grade us as journalists when it comes to how we've covered this one?
Yeah, I would say that perhaps there has been, in my view, progressively, the Kenyan media for a while, and I think the Kenyan media industry has kind of given foreign relations a rodeo. And as perhaps Caleb is pointing out, international relations could be seen as an expensive undertaking if then you're looking about the numbers. But again, if you flip the numbers, as he said, Uganda, we cannot ignore Uganda. We cannot ignore Tanzania. And we cannot ignore Ethiopia. And we cannot ignore South Sudan. And I think for the Kenyan media, the Kenyan journalists, we cannot, for heaven's sake, ignore what is happening in America, what is happening in South Africa, if we were to look at the numbers, because we are interrelated. And that Kenya has a fairly huge diaspora. And perhaps look at the numbers, that perhaps from the central bank, the remittances from the Kenyan diaspora, back into this country and our trading patterns. Am I perhaps saying that the journalists have not done a good job? Perhaps for me the challenge is more with the management. The challenge is more with the ownerships, and also the challenge, as I say now, is that for a bigger country like Kenya, for that matter, foreign relations, foreign coverage and understanding and educating and informing the public about foreign relations is not about investment. Unfortunately, it has been seen as an expensive undertaking. And let me put it this way. If you look at CGTN is fully funded by the Chinese government.
Right.
BBC is fully
British
funded
government.
by the British government.
Very true.
France 24 is fully funded by the French government. All right. Radio France International, Al Jazeera, Radio, what we call Radio Netherlands, VOA. Do you understand? The Turkish, a country that wants to have its space out there, and Radio South Africa. Remember? So information and communicating and projecting is as much related to internal.
Do you think Kenyans can get to that point where our media houses get to that point? Because the other thing is there's conflict of interest when you have a government that owns this media outlet, then their agendas are put first. Fine, you can argue, like, for example, BBC, as much as it may be funded by the British government, they may not be involved in the day-to-day coverage. But do you think we can ever get there?
Let me put it this way, and I think if I say this, perhaps your owners, the ownership here and the nation and what have you, there's been this friction. And I will say this, if you allow me. Free media is not equal to independent, and private media is not free. Do you understand?
Right.
And the notion that the need for this country to have what we call a functional public broadcaster that is funded not on the basis of making money, but the Kenyan public. Information is a right. Information is as much a right as education, health, and what have you. But if you are then, and I think because of what we had with the then KBC and Voice of Kenya, we let KBC adrift And then what we have politicians owning or having political affiliation with the media houses. Do we need an independent media? Yes. Do we need a state broadcaster? Yes. And I think it's about time that we needed to look at information as a basic human right.
Right.
Just to mention
yes,
Wafula. Important is that I think the embedded journalists in such trips have really done a lot of injustice. I think what they need to do is they have tried to localize these trips. Because I think most important is to see when President Kenyatta visits America, how is this meeting important, not only to Kenya, but to the entire continent? And how can it place Kenya as a strategic player in the region and also across the continent? So I think I've seen a lot of even the kind of reporting of these trips is that we are reporting from Washington, but we are reporting for Kenyans in Nairobi. And I think that's very unfortunate. I think most embedded, and then some journalists just report from the desk. But the embedded journalists who are going to these trips with the president need to understand that the fact that this is an African leader, how can this trip then be of significance to the entire continent?
And that leads me to my next question. Atemi, as journalists, where do we begin to gain contacts, especially international contacts? That's the other thing. How do I build my international contacts?
Actually, a reporter that contacts is dead. Yeah. You have not been being a journalist. In my days and days with Gashi in the newsroom, a few of us were privileged to cover the president and go on foreign trips. But what was required of us was first to establish a serious network of contacts, local, regional, and international, to do plenty of research.
Yes.
So before you join Uhuru on this trip, we've done lots of background research and stories about Kenya and the AU,
right,
about the establishing of a united Africa, and their efforts towards that led by firms like Trademark East Africa and the World Bank, trying to bring Africa back together as an economic bloc. Those are issues that before you join Uhuru on that trip, you've already internalized and understood why Africa must stand united as an economic bloc, why ECOWAS can work with the EAC,
with SADC,
so that Africa becomes one. You go there to negotiate, not as Kenya, but as Africa, as part of Africa.
Right.
So that background, that information is what guys lack. So you end up being a benchmarker,
precisely,
like the leaders on the trip.
Yes. Let's put it this way. Let me put it this way: foreign relation, or covering foreign affairs, is a specialized thing. You just don't wake up and you have somebody who has no clue, all right? And just because there has been, a trip offered, right? I mean, you must have somebody who has interest and perhaps basic understanding what foreign relations is all about, and what conduct and what have you. And because once you understand that, then you're better able to know what are the dynamics at play, because you give it a better context, you give it a better interpretation. Now, if you are benchmarking, and then you're going to be very narrow-minded that this is a competition between Nation, KTN, and KBC, and People Daily, I mean, and you're missing...
We drop the ball there.
You drop the ball, because really, the president of Kenya is going out there for the benefit of Kenya.
All right, because of time, Evans Wafula, I'd love to get your thoughts on how can we make these stories, these foreign trips, very appealing, and also what would you want to see as Kenyan media doing differently when we're covering Theresa May, who is expected in the country any moment now?
I think you mentioned that he was heading the foreign desk at the Nation.
Yeah.
I think there need to be a lot of training for specific journalists within media houses who can have training in diplomacy, international relations, to be able to understand properly that when the president is out there, and even have contacts with embassies. I mean, we have got a lot of embassies here. Most Kenyans don't know why we have embassies here in the first place. We need to see a journalist who is able to even educate and bring information to people, the importance of embassies. We see many diplomats here only releasing statements during elections.
But there's so much protocol if you're to get an interview.
And exactly, that's where you create those networks to be able to either work with those protocols or beat those protocols, so that you have to, and it's more or less about information. What is happening in media houses, there's not much investment in training, capacity building for journalists. I think there must be a lot of investment, and also not brokenness in the media houses.
As we're coming down like this, how you'd like to see us cover Theresa May's visit, the first visit from a prime minister in 30 years, as they come down?
I think today, or even before yesterday, we need to have seen a lot of stories about how Kenya will benefit with the, the Brexit. How will it affect Kenya, for example, and how will we benefit on the other hand? And to be able to interrogate this kind of developments in the UK before actually having because even when you see the kind of questions journalists ask, even these leaders, you will actually understand that they have no idea of what they're asking.
John Gashi.
Yes, we're going to have the British Prime Minister after 30 years.
Yeah.
And as you say, perhaps then the question is, what was happening in the last 30 years? Is there a historical context? What informed this? And as my colleagues are saying, and if you're going to have a foreign relations desk, you must fund it. It's expensive, but then it pays dividend. Perhaps, as you said, when you have contacts, when you understand the dynamics, when you understand the international etiquette, diplomacy, and what have you, the embassies, they have what we call very certified press sections and what have you. And you're better able to tell when there is a spin and what have you. But what Theresa May is coming. Why is she coming? Why now? What's the interest? And really, what are the outstanding issues in Kenya? A good story. She will be supposedly going to see the British troops or training. The British,
yes.
Right.
Military
force. A lot of people don't understand that the British Kenyan security networks and interaction have been ongoing. And for a very long time. What does that mean? The U.S. trip, the Kenyan security military interaction. What is it? Kenya has a very interesting defense arrangements with Britain, with the U.S., with Ethiopia. Do you see that in the media?
Allow me to deviate just a little bit, Gashi, here. Given the fact that you headed the Foreign Affairs desk, why do you think that we've not seen, and these are people who colonized us, why are we not seeing them visit more often? I think Xi Jinping has visited, and we've visited, President Uhuru has visited more compared to what we've seen in the past 30 years between UK and Nairobi. And the reason I ask that, perhaps could it have been ICC, the politics that we've been seeing playing out in the past 5 years? What? I just want to pick your mind.
Yes, let me perhaps put it this way. There is within the international community and perhaps even within academics, are we starting seeing the end of Western domination? And is the world geopolitical situation shifting? Is power shifting from the traditional Western perception, dominance and hegemony? Yes. Who are the new players on the world scene? It is China, it is India, it is Brazil. Take it or leave it, the US, the Western world, the European Union is on the decline. Is this the beginning of the end? No. It's a long way, but it has started.
Right. Atemi, your thoughts, especially on how you'd want to see us covering Theresa May's visit?
First of all, Britain and Kenya are joined at the hip. And Theresa May's visit is a big story for any reporter. The question is, why Kenya? There's a lot of interest in Kenya. Everybody's coming to Kenya, from China to Israel to Italy to India. All the leaders are focusing on Kenya. Apart from being the heart of Africa, there's plenty that has been written about Kenya, which our reporters miss out. Every movie you touch in Hollywood, the most popular nation that comes out is Kenya. Some people actually think that Kenya is Africa. So I think that background information, the knowledge that our reporters need to have, the history between Kenya and the West is critical. And then lastly, just touching on what Gashia said, I believe the end of America is here. I believe that God in his wisdom placed Trump where he placed him.
For a certain reason.
Yes, because every superpower must end, must die, must diminish.
Do you see him being impeached or finishing this term?
I don't think so. I think Trump might sail through. Trump might even get a second term.
Are you serious? You see him getting a second term?
A second term, yes. And that will help in bringing America to its end.
And perhaps, let me also put it this way.
5 minutes,
yes,
2 seconds.
2 seconds. Let me put it this way. Was the West, Britain, America, were they ever pro-Africa? They never were. All right? And don't go worrying about juxtaposing who is better, China or America or Britain vis-a-vis Africa. They are all looking for their best interest. Shall we understand that? And there was never any one day that Britain, the US, was pro-Africa. It never were. And all you have to do is look at the colonial, right? They dealt with Mobutu Sese Seko. They dealt with Idi Amin.
Gentlemen, I'm going to leave that conversation for there. Then that's a fantastic note, rather, to leave it on, and provoking quite actually, whether all these foreign trips are for Africans and how we can also leverage on that more. Gentlemen, it's always a pleasure. Asanteni sana. Okay, let's take a quick commercial break here on Morning Express. When we come back, Michael Gitonga will be diving into matters your health. It is a Wednesday, and we'll come back with that.